with our next guest,
We've had him in the Corona Committee several times, so he's a recurring guest. And Matthew, are you there?
Yes, I am there. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you, and we can also see you. Fantastic.
Okay, good. All right, I'm glad to be back and to join you for this conversation today. Just to be clear, before I begin, is it about 60 minutes or approximately that I have allotted, or should I squeeze it together more quickly?
No, I think that's about. So we expect the next guest at in an hour approximately. So I think it's okay. About that. So you have a little bit of time. Maybe. You're a journalist, lecturer, and historian, and senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. You're the founder of the Canadian Patriot Review and the Rising Tide Foundation, and you're the author of the Untold History of Canada series. Yeah, it's today we have the topic that you'd like to talk to us about the threat of martial law today.
Yes.
So maybe could you? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'm going to touch upon some of the material that I recently developed, both with an essay that was published about a month ago and a recent documentary that I just composed with a collaborator of mine who is an excellent filmmaker on the issue of an important piece of suppressed history from the 1930s in the United States of America, at a moment when fascism was very clearly being sold to the American people, as well as to the Europeans, as well as to the Canadians, as the great miracle solution to solve all of our problems that were befalling us during the dark years of the Great Depression. And this is a story which I had first come across many years ago, but I didn't think too deeply about it until more recently. And it's the story of a gentleman named General Smedley Butler, a retired general, the most decorated army officer in the history, even to this very day, who had gotten tired at a certain point of being a weapon used by financiers, Standard Oil, JP Morgan, other international financiers were using him and using the U.S. military for his entire career, especially since the days of Teddy Roosevelt at the turn of the century, to install puppet governments in South America, in Asia, in Africa. And at a certain point, he got sick of it and decided to begin campaigning to end the proto-military industrial complex. Mm-hmm. He was also somebody who was recruited, or there was an effort to recruit him on the part of certain Wall Street financiers who had been funding fascism, the growth of Hitler, the growth of Mussolini, the growth of Franco, and the growth of the American fascist movements that had swastikas inside of the United States. They wanted to recruit him in order to use him as a leader of American striking legionnaires. And that was going to be used to install him as the new dictator, the new fascist dictator that would be responsive to the edicts and commands of Wall Street and London inside of the United States, having deposed Franklin Roosevelt, who had been the president at that time. So this documentary that I did, I want to summarize some elements of it and encourage people to watch it and think a little bit about how this impacts today's world. Because in today's moment in history, we certainly see a repetition of some of the worst ideas of the 20th century all coming at the same time, right? We have just like the Great Depression of 1929 was orchestrated as a controlled demolition on a certain moment when those in the know had basically called in their broker call loans. This was a certain moment called Black Tuesday. And there was a pinprick of a bubble that had been created throughout the 1920s of a speculative bubble built upon debts that were unpayable. And when the certain loans were called in by the brokers who were taking out, loans that overvalued the stock markets by about eightfold, nobody had the money to pay those broker call loans, and everything defaulted, resulting in a very foreseeable chain reaction collapse and the complete destruction of the overall economy, which spread all across Europe like fire. The suicides were astronomical. millions of people died of starvation throughout this entire period, which continued deep into the 1930s. Farms, I think the US lost something like 40% of their farms that went bankrupt. 50% of the industrial capacity that was there in 1929 was lost. And you had the biggest wealth transfer that we had ever seen, perhaps only exceeded by today's world. But those who were on the preferred clients list of JP Morgan, who understood what was going to happen, were able to sell their stocks short before the blowout and then buy up for pennies on the dollar all of the things that used to be owned by farmers, small and medium Mittelstand type workers, entrepreneurs. And in this documentary, I try to make the case that it's not like it's called the business coup, but it's not like this was done for business, because those who had then captured many of the levers of production throughout the 1929, 30, 31, 32 period, they didn't use their newfound powers to increase production of agriculture or industry. In fact, what we saw was that we had a contraction and an increase of scarcity artificially created, even though they had the power and the means to increase those zones of production, which are so vital for the maintenance of human health and well-being. So there was a shock therapy and a conscious effort to traumatize, psychospiritually victimize the population, both in America and Europe, in order to make people more radicalizable, more acceptant of forms of government that they would normally never accept. Ideas like, for example, eugenics, which is one of the most unchristian, immoral forms of pseudosciences, was being sold and becoming very popular. The idea that, if we could only just euthanize the useless eaters, right? Get rid of those who had low IQs, who are of lesser value to society, then we could have more abundance for the healthy among us. There was a very big tendency amongst the fear and despair to look for scapegoats. And rather than finding the scapegoats rightfully where they should have been, and here I'm referring to the actual Wall Street and City of London financiers, instead it was often redirected towards a hate for things like the Jews or something like that absorbed a lot of the hate. So you had something very radicalized. And I put together a few slides. I'm going to just do a little screen share here because I think it's a very important series of images, which one really has to see to believe. If people want to see the documentary in full, they can watch it here. That's the hyperlink. It's called Why Assume There Will Be Another Election? General Butler in the 1934 Bankers Coup Revisited. It's about 20 minutes long. It's not too long. And all of our documentaries can be seen there at canadianpatriot.org/CP/videos. I'm going to add one thing, because yesterday we know that the Queen died, and Operation, what's called Unicorn, I don't know why they call it that, was unveiled, which was basically an operation to set into motion a sequence of operations that would result in the inauguration of Prince Charles as the new king, King Charles III, as the king of Britain, as well as the broader Commonwealth of 52, I believe it's 52 or 53 nations of the world are part of the British Commonwealth, 22% of the world's surface area, including the Cayman Islands, including a lot of the levers of global drug money laundering, global terrorist financing. Here I'm talking about, again, the Virgin Islands, other things that are in British controlled territory, very opaque. This is all part of the global mechanisms of control. So Prince Charles is inheriting quite a bit. So I figured this particular presentation I'm doing would not be complete or correct if I didn't say a word or two about the developments in Britain. And these are very much tied to the danger of a coup in the United States. They're not two different ideas. Most people think of Prince Charles as a doofus. Oh, can people see my video or my images right now?
Yeah, but I would also like, if that's possible, to see them on the large screen, so I can see them better. Okay.
Well, I'll just continue.
So just go ahead.
Yeah, many people do tend to think of Prince Charles, now King Charles, or soon to be, as a bit of a doofus. And I don't think that they're wrong, who likes to talk to plants and, gives money to young scientists who try to come up with new gimmicks to collect cow farts and put masks on cows to collect their CO2. They think of him as sort of like a zany type of character. I think there's something also bubbling below the surface, which is a little bit more concerning. So he does have a goofy quality about him, but there's something also darker where he does see himself, you got to feel bad for some of these royals who are born into a very controlled environment their entire lives. They're being told they're the heirs to the ancient and immutable permanent empire. And I mean, they're surrounded by flatterers, handlers. I mean, and they're used for a certain reason. The fact that when the Great Reset in June of 2020 was unveiled, the fact that it wasn't Klaus Schwab, it wasn't Bill Gates who were selected to unveil the Great Reset. It wasn't any of these people you would expect. It was, in fact, Prince Charles. Prince Charles sees himself as a bit of an eco-warrior crusader king, except in today's world, the new crusade is not against the Muslim world in the Holy Land, but rather it is against human beings themselves, or at least the things that sustain human life.